The crack of a beer mug slamming against wood cut through the Saturday night noise like a rifle shot. "Hey, check out that dog." The Iron Horse Bar sat 3 miles from Fort Bragg's main gate, a weathered establishment that had served soldiers since Vietnam. 25 patrons filled the space tonight, most wearing civilian clothes, but sporting military haircuts that betrayed their profession. Faded unit patches covered the walls alongside photographs of fallen warriors, their faces frozen in eternal youth beneath glass frames yellowed by decades of cigarette smoke and spilled whiskey. Every head turned toward the corner booth, shrouded in shadow. A woman sat there alone, small, maybe 5'4", brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that hadn't seen a brush in days. She wore a flannel shirt so faded the original red plaid had surrendered to a washed-out pink, frayed at the shoulders where fabric had given up its fight against time. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing remarkable about her at all, except for what lay beneath the table. A Belgian Malinois rested at her feet, its muscular body coiled in that particular stillness that had nothing to do with sleep. The dog wore a tactical harness, coyote tan, the color bleached by sun and sand until it looked like desert camouflage. The harness bore no patches, no identification, just the ghost of stitching where something had once been attached and deliberately removed. Sergeant First Class Blake Holloway pushed back from his table and stood. 6 feet 2 inches of recent Ranger School graduate, shoulders like a linebacker, the fresh tab on his sleeve catching the overhead light like a Medal of Honor. He walked toward the corner with the swagger of a man who had never been told no. 4 soldiers followed, his pack, his audience. "Hey!" Blake planted both hands on the woman's table, leaning down until his face hovered inches from hers. "That harness is military issue. Where'd you get it?" The woman didn't look up, her fingers wrapped around a glass of water, plain water, condensation dripping down the sides, like tears. She rotated the glass a quarter turn, said nothing. "I'm talking to you." Blake's voice carried the edge of authority he had practiced in front of mirrors for years. "That dog. Who does it belong to?" Silence. The Malinois didn't move, not a twitch, but its eyes, 2 pools of liquid darkness that had seen things no civilian dog ever would, locked onto Blake with the precision of a targeting system acquiring a threat. She probably bought it at Army surplus. Staff Sergeant Amber Caldwell stepped up beside Blake, arms crossed over her chest. One of the few women to earn a Ranger tab, she wore her achievement like armor against any suggestion that she didn't belong. Girls these days love playing military dress-up. Makes for great Instagram content. Laughter rippled through the group. The woman's finger traced the rim of her glass. Around and around. Her eyes remained fixed on some point in the middle distance that only she could see. "Stolen valor," Specialist Archer Webb added, adjusting his glasses with the practiced gesture of someone who spent more time with regulations than rifles. "But with a dog. That's a new one." He worked as a K9 trainer on base, which made him an expert on everything canine in his own mind. That harness is standard issue for military working dogs. You can't just buy those at Walmart. Private First Class Levi Barnes said nothing yet, but his jaw worked like he was chewing on words too sharp to swallow. His knuckles had gone white around his beer bottle, and something dark flickered behind his eyes whenever he looked at the dog. The woman raised her glass, took a single sip, set it down precisely in the water ring it had left on the table. Blake slammed his palm down hard enough to make the glass jump. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She looked up. Her eyes were gray. Not the soft gray of morning fog, but the cold gray of gunmetal, of storm clouds building over hostile territory, of things that happened in places that didn't exist on any official map. They held Blake's gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then dropped back to her water as if he wasn't worth the effort of a third. In those 2 seconds, something flickered across her face so fast that Blake almost missed it. Not fear, not anger, something else entirely. The expression of someone who had seen so much that one more Ranger with an attitude problem barely registered as background noise. But Blake had never been good at reading subtlety. "Check the dog," he ordered Archer. "You're the expert. Tell us if it's actually trained or just some rescue mutt with fancy accessories." Archer stepped forward with the confidence of a man about to demonstrate his expertise. He positioned himself in front of the Malinois and pointed at the ground. "Sits." The German command came out crisp, textbook perfect. Standard protocol for military working dogs trained in dual language systems. The dog didn't move. "See?" Archer turned back to the group with a triumphant smile. "Not trained. Any real MWD would respond to that command instantly. She probably found this dog at a shelter and bought the harness to make it look important. More laughter. The woman's left hand dropped below the table, resting on her thigh. A small movement. Almost invisible. The Malinois sat up straight. Not the gradual rise of a pet responding to a cue, but the sharp, immediate response of an animal operating on military precision. Its spine formed a perfect vertical line, its chest expanded, its eyes never leaving Blake's position. Archer's smile faltered. Hand signals, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. She's using hand signals. So she watched some YouTube videos. Blake waved dismissively. Doesn't prove anything. I want to see documentation, registration, something that proves she didn't steal a military asset. The bartender emerged from behind the counter. Silas Nguyen, owner of the Iron Horse for 15 years, carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had earned his peace the hard way. The Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor, tattooed on his forearm, had faded but never disappeared. He walked toward the confrontation with the measured pace of someone who had broken up 1,000 arguments and buried 100 friends. Gentlemen, his voice cut through the tension like a blade through butter. Whatever this is, maybe dial it back a notch. Blake barely glanced at him. Stay out of this, old-timer. This is active duty business. I served 20 years in the Corps before you were born, son. Show some respect. Respect? Blake laughed, turning to face Silas fully. For what? Making drinks? Look, I appreciate your service and all, but you've been out of the game for how long? Things have changed. We're the ones keeping this country safe now. So why don't you go back to pouring whiskey and let the professionals handle this? Silas's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. Beside him, a waitress had stopped with a tray of drinks clutched against her chest. Ivy Blackwood, 23 years old, working her way through nursing school, one shift at a time. She watched the confrontation with wide eyes, her gaze flickering between the aggressive soldiers and the silent woman in the corner. Ma'am? Ivy edged closer to the table, voice barely above a whisper. Do you need me to call someone? The police, or... The woman shook her head once. A small movement, controlled, as if even that simple gesture was rationed. At the bar, an older man in a worn leather jacket set down his whiskey glass. Colonel Solomon Crawford, retired, hadn't worn his uniform in 15 years, but the 82nd Airborne patch still hung in his closet next to 3 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. He was 70 years old, his hair had gone white, and his knees complained about every change in weather, but his eyes remained sharp as they tracked the scene unfolding across the room. Something about the woman nagged at him, the way she sat, the angle of her shoulders, the particular stillness that had nothing to do with passivity and everything to do with training so deep it had become instinct. He'd seen that stillness before, in places that didn't make the evening news. Captain Cyrus Hartwell sat closer to the action, his JAG Corps insignia catching the light as he looked up from his phone. A military lawyer by trade, he approached every situation like a case to be evaluated, evidence to be weighed, judgment to be rendered. Right now, his assessment came down firmly on the side of skepticism. Let them sort it out, he said to no one in particular. If she's got nothing to hide, she'll prove it. If not, he shrugged, not my problem. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We release military stories like this every single week. Stories about the warriors who serve in silence, the heroes who never seek recognition. One click helps us keep telling these stories. Now, let's get back to what happens when Blake Holloway makes the biggest mistake of his career. The confrontation had gathered an audience now. Other patrons turned in their seats, conversations dying as the tension in the corner grew thick enough to cut. A Vietnam veteran named Caleb Morrison, 82 years old with a face like crumpled leather, watched from his regular stool with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that the loudest soldiers rarely had the most impressive records. Blake was enjoying the attention. He could feel the eyes on him, the weight of expectation from his squad, the opportunity to assert dominance in front of an audience. This was what leadership looked like, taking charge, demanding accountability, showing these civilians and these retired has-beens what real military bearing meant. Last chance, he said, leaning closer to the woman. Show me something that proves this dog is yours, or I'm calling the MPS and reporting a stolen military asset. That's a federal crime. You could do real time. The woman's finger stopped tracing her glass. For a long moment, she sat motionless, her breathing so controlled it was barely visible. Then she tilted her head slightly, regarding Blake with an expression that a more perceptive man might have recognized as pity. "The dog is mine." 4 words. The first she'd spoken since entering the bar an hour ago. Her voice was low, calm, with a slight rasp that suggested disuse, like an instrument that hadn't been played in months. "Oh, it speaks." Blake's mockery drew laughs from his squad. "And I'm supposed to just take your word for it? Come on, sweetheart. I've got 11 weeks of ranger training and 3 years active duty. You think I can't spot a fake when I see one?" Levi Barnes finally stepped forward, his patience snapping like a worn guitar string. His face had gone red, and his voice cracked with emotion that ran deeper than simple harassment. "My brother died in Syria," he said, the words tumbling out jagged and raw. "K9 handler, Sergeant Nathan Barnes. He gave his life protecting people like you, and you have the nerve to walk in here wearing his unit's gear like a costume." The woman's composure flickered for the first time. Just a fraction of a second. A shadow passed across her gray eyes like clouds racing across a battlefield sky. Then it was gone, replaced by that impenetrable stillness. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Don't." Levi's voice rose, cracking. "Don't you dare. You didn't know him. You didn't watch my mother cry for months. You didn't see what it did to my dad. And now you're sitting there with some military costume and a pretty dog, playing soldier, making a mockery of everything my brother died for." Ivy the waitress stepped back, her hand rising to cover her mouth. The tension in the bar had shifted, taking on a weight that pressed against everyone present. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was grief transformed into rage, loss, weaponized into cruelty. The woman looked at Levi, really looked at him, for the first time since the confrontation began. Her gaze traveled across his face, cataloging details, reading something in the set of his jaw and the pain behind his eyes. "Nathan Barnes," she said softly. "Sergeant K9 handler, Syria." Levi flinched as if she'd struck him. "How do you know that? How do you know his rank?" "Everyone knows about Syria," Blake cut in, grabbing control of the conversation again. "It was all over the news. She probably Googled military dogs before coming here, setting up her little con." But something had changed in the room. The woman's eyes hadn't left Levi's face, and there was something in her expression that didn't match the accusation of stolen valor. Something that looked almost like recognition, almost like sorrow. The dog, Ghost, made a sound low in its throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine, something in between. A sound that seemed to match the emotion flickering across the woman's face. "Enough psychology," Amber said, stepping forward with her phone raised. "I'm going to find out what's really going on here." She began typing rapidly. "K9 handler tattoos, unit markings. If she's fake, I'll prove it in 60 seconds. The woman returned her attention to her water glass. Around and around, her finger traced the rim, the movement hypnotic in its precision. Her other hand rested on Ghost's head, fingers buried in the fur behind his ears, in a gesture that seemed less like petting and more like anchoring. Colonel Crawford watched from the bar, his whiskey forgotten. The nagging sensation had grown stronger, coalescing into something that felt like memory, trying to surface through murky water. He'd sat in briefing rooms. He'd read classified reports. He'd seen photographs of operators whose faces were never meant to be known. Something about this woman, but the memory wouldn't come, not yet. "Here we go," Amber's voice rang with triumph. "K9 handler markings. Standard military working dog handler tattoos include unit designation, the dog's tactical name, and deployment dates, usually on the forearm or shoulder. So," she looked up at the woman with a predator's smile. "Roll up your sleeves. Let's see what you've got." The woman didn't move. "That's what I thought." Amber turned to play to the crowd. "Nothing, because she's nothing. Just another wannabe trying to ride on the sacrifices of real soldiers." "Stand up." Blake's patience had evaporated. He reached down and grabbed the woman's arm, his fingers closing around her wrist like a vice. "I said stand up!" Ghost exploded into motion, not to attack, not to bite, but to interpose his body between the woman and the threat. He rose in a single fluid movement, positioning himself precisely at 45 degrees to her left, his body forming a barrier that would force Blake to go through him to reach her. His teeth were visible now, white against black gums, and the growl that emerged from his chest was the sound of ancient warnings, of wolves defending their pack, of something primal and absolutely serious. Blake released her arm and stepped back, his bravado cracking for the first time. "Control your dog." "Easy, boy." 2 words. The same low voice, but with an undertone of authority that hadn't been there before. A command voice. The kind that got forged in places where hesitation meant death and second-guessing got people killed. Ghost stopped growling. He didn't relax, didn't stand down, but the immediate threat display subsided into watchful readiness. His eyes never left Blake. "That's impressive training," Archer admitted reluctantly, "but it doesn't prove anything. She could have hired a professional trainer. Lots of civilians do that with rescue dogs." A professional trainer. The woman's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. Sure. She stood slowly, rising from the booth with the fluid grace of someone whose body had been trained to move efficiently, economically, without wasted motion. Even standing, she barely reached Blake's shoulder. She looked fragile, breakable, the kind of woman who should be scared surrounded by hostile soldiers in a dim bar. But she didn't look scared. She looked like someone who had been in far worse situations than this, and had walked out of all of them. "I'm going to get some water from the bar," she said calmly. "My dog will come with me. We're not looking for trouble." She took a step forward. Blake blocked her path, his chest thrust out, using his size as a weapon. "You're not going anywhere until we sort this out. You've got military gear, a military-trained dog, and no explanation. That's suspicious, and I intend to get to the bottom of it." The woman stopped. She stood perhaps 3 feet from Blake, looking up at him with those gunmetal gray eyes. Close enough that he could see the fine lines at their corners, the marks of years spent squinting against desert sun and strategic necessity. Close enough to notice, if he'd been paying attention, that her hands hung loose at her sides in a ready position that had nothing to do with submission. "Move," she said quietly. "Make me." It was the kind of response Blake had used 100 times. The kind that usually worked, because most people backed down when confronted with his size and his rank and his Ranger tab. Most people looked at him and saw a threat too big to challenge, but the woman just looked at him with those gray eyes, and for a moment something shifted in the air between them. Something that felt like the pressure drop before a storm, like the silence before artillery, like the held breath before a mission that could go either way. Then she stepped around him. It happened so fast that no one saw exactly how. One moment she was standing in front of Blake, the next she was beside him, then past him, moving toward the bar with Ghost at her perfect 45-degree position. She hadn't touched him, hadn't pushed him, hadn't done anything that could be called aggressive. She'd simply flowed around him like water around a rock. Blake spun, his face reddening. No one had ever done that to him. No one had ever made him look foolish in front of his squad, in front of witnesses, in front of the whole bar. His Ranger tab felt like it was burning on his sleeve. "Hey!" He surged after her, grabbing her shoulder. "I said you're not going anywhere!" The woman's reaction was instant and invisible at the same time. She rotated slightly, her shoulder dipping just enough that Blake's grip slid off like water off waxed canvas. An escape artist move, the kind taught in SERE training, the kind that most people never had reason to learn. Blake grabbed again, catching her flannel sleeve. This time she didn't evade. She stopped, her back to him, Ghost already turning to assess the threat. "You should let go," she said. "Or what? You'll sick your fake military dog on me?" Blake laughed, looking back at his squad for support. "This I gotta see." At the bar, Colonel Crawford had risen from his stool. Something had clicked in his memory now, triggered by the way she'd moved, the way she'd evaded without seeming to evade. He'd seen that technique before, not in standard training, not in regular briefings, in classified footage. "Son," his voice cut across the room, carrying the authority of decades of command. "I'd recommend you release that woman," Blake scoffed. "With all due respect, sir, you're not in the chain of command anymore. This is between me and now." The single word landed like a judge's gavel. Something in the colonel's tone made Blake hesitate. Not for long, just a second, but long enough for Silas behind the bar to reach for his phone, for Ivy to back away toward the kitchen, for Captain Hartwell to finally set aside his own phone and pay attention. But then Amber spoke up, her voice dripping with contempt. "Oh, come on. Are we really going to let some old-timer tell us what to do? Look at her." She gestured at the woman with disgust. "She's nobody. She's nothing. Probably picked up that dog from a pound and bought the harness online. The whole thing is pathetic." Levi moved closer, his grief transformed into something uglier. "My brother died. Real soldiers die. And people like her get to walk around pretending, playing dress-up, making everyone who sacrificed look like fools. I'm sick of it." The woman turned to face them all, Her back was to the bar now, Ghost positioned at her side like a furry shadow with teeth. The light caught her face differently from this angle, illuminating the fine lines around her eyes, the slight asymmetry of her nose that suggested it had been broken and set more than once, the faded scar that traced along her hairline like a river on a map. "I understand," she said quietly. "I understand why you're angry. I understand what loss feels like. And I understand that sometimes anger is easier than grief." "Don't you dare," Levi's voice cracked. "Don't you dare try to manipulate me with fake sympathy. You don't know anything about loss. You don't know anything about sacrifice. You're just some civilian with a costume and a dog." "Hey." Archer had been scrolling through his phone, and now his face wore a confused frown. "This is weird. I'm looking up K9 handler units in Syria, and there's a lot of information that's classified. Like, really classified. More than it should be for a regular MWD operation." "So?" Blake shrugged. "Everything's classified these days. Doesn't change anything." "No, but..." Archer looked up at the woman with new uncertainty in his eyes. "It says there was a major operation in Raqqa, March of 2019. Something about an intelligence recovery mission. Details heavily redacted, but it mentions K9 assets performing heroic actions." The woman's expression didn't change, but something in the set of her shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly, like a door that had been locked was now standing slightly ajar. "Heroic actions," Amber sneered. "For a dog. How noble. That still doesn't explain why this particular woman has military gear she has no right to." The old Vietnam veteran, Caleb Morrison, had been watching in silence. Now he spoke for the first time, his voice rusty from years of whiskey and cigarettes, but carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "You know," he said slowly, "in my day, we had a saying, the louder a man talks about what he did, the less he probably did. And the ones who never said anything at all." He shook his head. "Those were the ones you didn't mess with. Times have changed, old man." Blake dismissed him with a wave. "These days, stolen valor is everywhere. People pretending to be heroes when they've never served a day in their lives. I've seen it a dozen times, and I'm not about to let it happen on my watch." "Your watch," Caleb chuckled, the sound like gravel shifting. "Boy, your watch hasn't even started yet." Blake's face reddened further. He was losing control of the situation, losing the narrative, and he could feel his squad's attention wavering. He needed to reassert dominance. He needed to prove that he was right, and this woman was exactly what he'd accused her of being. He grabbed her arm again, harder this time. "I want to see ID, right now. Driver's license, military ID, anything. You're going to prove who you are, or I'm calling the MPS." The woman looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. For a long moment, she just stood there, evaluating him with an expression that contained neither fear nor anger, just a sort of weary assessment, like a teacher watching a student make the same mistake for the third time. "Let go," she said again. "Make me." It was the same response as before, but Blake put more force behind it this time, squeezing her arm, demonstrating his strength. Captain Hartwell stood from his table, his JAG instincts finally overcoming his reluctance to get involved. "Sergeant, that's enough. You can't physically detain a civilian without cause. Whatever you think is happening here, this isn't the way to handle it. I've got cause. Look at the evidence. Military harness, trained dog, no identification, no explanation. That's suspicious behavior, Captain. Even you have to see that. What I see is a potential harassment complaint and a ranger about to throw away his career over a dog." Hartwell's voice carried the cold precision of someone who dealt in regulations and consequences. "Release her, now! That's not a request." Blake hesitated. The captain was right about the regulations, and even Blake's arrogance wasn't enough to make him ignore a direct intervention from a JAG officer. But backing down now, in front of everyone, after all his posturing, the woman made the decision for him. She reached into her back pocket with her free hand, the movement slow and deliberate, clearly visible to everyone watching. Blake flinched, his grip tightening. "Easy." Her voice remained calm. "I'm getting my wallet." She pulled out a thin leather billfold, worn smooth by years of handling. She didn't open it, didn't show what was inside, just held it in her hand like an offering. "You want to see ID," she said quietly. "You want to see proof. But ask yourself something first, Sergeant. What happens if you're wrong? What happens if I'm exactly who I'm not supposed to be? That's not an answer. Blake snatched the wallet from her hand before she could react. Let's see what you've been hiding. He flipped it open. The bar went silent. Blake's face underwent a transformation, color draining from it like water from a sink. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. What? Amber pushed forward, trying to see. What is it? Let me look. Blake's hand was shaking. He held the wallet open, and even from a distance, those closest could see the glint of something metallic. The crisp edges of something official. But Blake's body blocked the full view, and his expression, a mixture of confusion, fear, and dawning realization, told a story that no one else could yet read. Give it back. The woman's voice had changed, hardened. It wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive, but it carried an authority that seemed to fill the entire bar. The voice of someone who was used to being obeyed. The voice of someone who gave orders that people followed into places they might never return from. Blake's hand trembled as he closed the wallet and handed it back. He tried to speak, but whatever he had seen had stolen his words. The woman slid the wallet back into her pocket. Satisfied? I don't... Blake looked at his squad, at Captain Hartwell, at Colonel Crawford, searching for an anchor in suddenly shifting seas. That can't be real. That has to be fake. What did you see? Archer demanded. Blake, what's in the wallet? Blake swallowed hard. I need to make a call. He pulled out his phone and walked away from the group, his movements jerky, uncertain. The swagger was gone. The confidence had evaporated. Whatever he'd seen in that wallet had fundamentally altered his understanding of the situation. The woman watched him go, then turned back to the bar. She nodded once to Silas. Could I get that water now? Silas filled a glass with shaking hands. Something had shifted in the bar, something everyone could feel but no one could yet name. The woman accepted the water with a quiet thank you and took a single sip. Behind her, Levi hadn't moved. His face still bore the marks of grief and anger, but confusion had joined the mixture. He stared at her back, at the dog sitting motionless at her side, trying to reconcile what he'd seen with what he believed. Who are you? He asked, his voice stripped of accusation. A genuine question. Really? Who are you? The woman set down her glass. She turned slowly, facing the young soldier who had lost his brother to a war that most Americans had already forgotten. Someone who knew him, she said softly. Your brother. Nathan. Levi's breath caught. What? Not here. She glanced around the bar, at the phones that had appeared in several hands, at the eyes watching from every direction. Not like this. No. Levi stepped closer, his voice rising. No, you don't get to drop something like that and then just walk away. How did you know Nathan? How do you know his name? What happened to him? The woman's gray eyes held sorrow now, deep and genuine, and impossible to fake. He was brave, she said quietly. He was kind. He told terrible jokes at the worst possible times, and he loved that dog more than anything else in the world. What dog? Levi's confusion deepened. Nathan didn't have a dog. He was a handler, but his MWD was killed in action 6 months before he stopped. His eyes dropped to the Malinois sitting at the woman's feet. Ghost looked back at him with those dark, ancient eyes. No, Levi whispered. That's not possible. Shepard's dog died. It was in the casualty report. The dog was killed in action alongside my brother. Reports can say a lot of things, the woman replied, especially classified reports. Then how? Levi's voice broke. How is he here? How are you here? What really happened in Syria? Colonel Crawford had moved closer during the exchange, close enough now to hear every word. The nagging memory had finally surfaced, rising from the depths of decades of classified briefings and need-to-know information. Operation Silent Thunder, he said quietly. The woman went very still. The colonel continued, his voice low but clear. March 2019, Raqqa, an intelligence recovery mission that went sideways. Most of the details are still classified above my pay grade, but I sat in on the briefing. His eyes locked onto hers. They showed us a photo, just one, a woman. They never gave us her name, just her call sign. The woman said nothing. They said she was the one who saved it all. The mission, the assets, everything. They said she went back into a compromised position to recover critical intelligence, and that her K9 partner stayed behind for... He stopped. His face had gone pale. For 14 hours, alone, guarding classified materials until extraction could be arranged. The bar had gone silent. Even the jukebox had stopped playing, as if the whole building was holding its breath. "That dog," Colonel Crawford pointed at Ghost. "That's not just any Malinois. That's a tactical K9 that held position in an active combat zone, alone, without handler support, for over half a day. They don't train dogs to do that. That's not training. That's loyalty." The woman's hand dropped to Ghost's head, her fingers finding the familiar path through his fur. "What was the call sign?" Levi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The woman in the photo. What did they call her?" Colonel Crawford's eyes never left the woman's face. "Whisper." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward in every direction. Those closest to the conversation stiffened. Those farther away leaned in, sensing that something important was happening, but not yet understanding what. "No." Amber had pushed her way back to the front of the group. "No, that doesn't make sense." Whisper was, if that operation is real, if any of this is true, then Whisper would be special operations. She'd be SEAL. Women can't be SEALs. Everyone knows that. Can't they? The colonel raised an eyebrow. "When did you last read the regulations on special operations assignments, Staff Sergeant?" Amber faltered. "I mean, there were rumors, but there are always rumors. Sometimes rumors are true. Sometimes the truth is classified so deep that even the rumors don't come close." The colonel turned back to the woman. "Senior Chief?" She looked at him for a long moment, gray eyes searching his face for something. Recognition, perhaps, or threat assessment, or simply the calculation of risk versus necessity. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The colonel came to attention, his spine straightened, with the muscle memory of 50 years of military service. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted, and then he raised his right hand in a salute so crisp, so precise, so filled with respect, that several other veterans in the bar found themselves rising to their feet in automatic response. "Ma'am," he said simply. The woman accepted the salute with the quiet dignity of someone who had received many but never sought them. She nodded once, acknowledgement rather than dismissal. "Please," she said. "At ease. I'm not in uniform." "With respect, ma'am, some things don't require a uniform." Levi had backed away, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "Nathan," he said, the name coming out broken, "you knew my brother. You were there when he died." The woman turned to face him fully. "Yes, then tell me." Tears had started to form in Levi's eyes, the grief that had transformed into anger now reverting to its original form. "Tell me what happened. Tell me how he died." The official report was just words. Cold words on paper. I need to know the truth. The woman looked around the bar at all the watching faces, the recording phones, the audience that had gathered for a confrontation and found themselves witnessing something else entirely. "Not here," she said again. "Not with cameras, not with witnesses who don't have clearance." "Clearance?" Levi's voice cracked. "He was my brother. I have every right to know how he died." "You have every right to know," she agreed quietly. "But the people watching don't, and the moment someone puts this on social media, things get complicated in ways you can't imagine." She reached out and touched his shoulder, a gentle contact that seemed to surprise both of them. "Come with me. There's a back room. We can talk there." Silas nodded from behind the bar. "VIP room in the back. It's private. Sound doesn't carry." Levi hesitated, looking at his squad mates, at Blake, who still stood apart, making phone calls with shaking hands, at the colonel and captain, who watched with expressions of dawning understanding. "Go," Amber said, her voice stripped of its earlier contempt. Whatever she had pieced together from the fragments of information floating through the air had drained the mockery from her. "Go hear what she has to say. We'll wait." Levi followed the woman toward the back of the bar, Ghost padding alongside in perfect formation. They passed between tables of silent patrons, through a doorway hung with beaded curtains that clicked softly as they parted, into a room that the Iron Horse kept for special occasions and private conversations. The door closed behind them, cutting off the view of those who remained. In the main bar, Colonel Crawford lowered himself onto a bar stool with the careful movements of age and the weight of secrets too heavy to carry standing. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "this just got interesting." Silas poured him a fresh whiskey without being asked. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "We're not on duty, son. You can say whatever you want." "What the hell just happened? Who is she really?" The colonel picked up his glass and stared into the amber liquid as if it contained answers. She's one of the people who do the jobs that can't be acknowledged, who fight the wars that never make the news, who that come home carrying things they can never talk about to people who can never understand. He took a long drink. She's exactly what she appears to be, and nothing like what anyone expected. Across the room, Blake had finished his phone call. His face had gone gray, and when he walked back toward the group, his steps lacked their earlier confidence. He stopped in front of Captain Hartwell. "Sir," he said, his voice barely audible, "I need to report to my CO immediately. I've been advised that I may have committed a serious breach of protocol." "No," Hartwell shook his head. "You stay here. Whatever happened, we deal with it as a unit. Amber, Archer, gather around. Blake, tell us what you learned." Blake's throat worked as he swallowed. "I called a buddy in intelligence, asked him to run a check on call signs, specifically Whisper, and he told me to forget I ever heard that name." Blake's voice shook. "He said that call sign is flagged at the highest levels, that the person attached to it is classified above his pay grade, above his CO's pay grade, above anyone's pay grade outside of a very small circle. That doesn't tell us anything specific." "No." Blake looked at the beaded curtain where the woman had disappeared. "But it tells us everything we need to know. Whatever she is, whoever she is, I just spent the last hour harassing someone that people with stars on their shoulders consider important enough to protect with classification walls." Amber's face had gone pale. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," Captain Hartwell said slowly, "that we wait, and when she comes back out, we apologize properly, and we hope that she's feeling merciful." In the VIP room, separated from the drama still unfolding outside, the woman who called herself Whisper stood facing Levi Barnes. Ghost had settled at her feet, his dark eyes watching the young soldier with an intensity that seemed almost human. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything." Levi's voice was raw. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." She nodded slowly and began to speak, her voice low and measured, carrying the weight of memories she rarely shared. March 15th, 2019. Raqqa Province, Syria. We were running a joint operation with intelligence assets, recovering information that could compromise an entire network of agents across the Middle East. 47 people, 47 names on a hard drive that we needed to extract before hostile forces could capture it. Levi listened without interrupting, his hands clenched at his sides. The extraction went wrong. We were ambushed 2 clicks from the landing zone. The team had to fall back, but the intelligence hadn't been secured yet. Someone had to stay behind. "Nathan," Levi whispered. Nathan stayed to provide cover fire while I went back for the hard drive. He held a position that should have been impossible to hold. 3 minutes. That's all I needed. 3 minutes to get to the bunker, secure the intelligence, and get out. She paused, her jaw tightening. I got the drive. I was heading back to Nathan's position when the second wave hit. He was surrounded. I tried to reach him, tried to fight my way through, but there were too many. Her voice caught for just a moment before she controlled it. "He told me to go," his last transmission. "Whisper, go. Save the 47. That's an order." Tears were streaming freely down Levi's face now. "I should have stayed. I should have found a way. But he was right. The mission came first. The 47 came first. So I ran." "And the dog?" Levi looked upon at Ghost. "How did he survive?" "Ghost was with me when I went back for the drive. When the second ambush hit, we got separated from Nathan. The bunker was compromised, but I couldn't carry the hard drive and fight at the same time. So I gave Ghost a command I'd never given before. I told him to guard, hold position, protect the asset, don't leave until I come back or until the code word is given." She looked down at her partner. "That dog stayed in that bunker for 14 hours, alone, in an active combat zone, with hostile forces searching for the intelligence we'd taken. He didn't move, didn't bark, didn't give away his position. He just stayed and guarded, exactly like I asked." 14 hours, Levi repeated, the number hitting him like a physical blow. "When extraction finally came, they found him exactly where I'd left him, dehydrated, exhausted, but still guarding. The hard drive was intact. The 47 were saved." She knelt down and put her arms around Ghost's neck, pressing her face into his fur for just a moment. "He's the reason any of those people are alive. He and Nathan. They saved them all." Levi sank into a chair, his legs unable to support him anymore. Why didn't we know? Why weren't we told any of this? Because officially, that operation never happened. The 47 are still active, still in the field. If anyone knew what really occurred, their covers would be compromised. Your brother died a hero, Levi, but he died a classified hero, one whose sacrifice could never be publicly acknowledged, because acknowledging it would undo everything he died to protect. Levi struggled for words. That's not fair. No, it's not. The woman stood, her expression softening slightly. But it's the job. It's what we sign up for. Your brother knew the risks. He accepted them. And in the end, he made a choice that saved 47 lives. That's not nothing. That's everything. Levi wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What was he like? At the end? Was he scared? A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine expression she'd shown all night. Nathan Barnes was never scared. He was cracking jokes even when everything was falling apart. His last transmission to me, after he told me to go, after he gave the order that saved the mission. She shook her head, the smile widening slightly. He said, "Hey, Whisper, tell my dog I said good boy." A broken laugh escaped Levi's throat, mixing with his tears. That sounds like him. That sounds exactly like him. He died making a difference. He died saving people. And he died trusting me to finish what we started. She met Levi's eyes. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry the reports couldn't tell you the truth, but I wanted you to know, wanted your family to know, that he was the best of us, the bravest of us, and not a day goes by that I don't think about what he did. Levi sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had learned. Then he looked up at her with new eyes. Why are you here? He asked. In this bar tonight? It can't be a coincidence. It's not. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph, worn at the edges from handling. I came to see the Peterson family. They live about 10 miles from here. Corman Daniel Peterson. He died the same day as Nathan, during the extraction. I visit the families when I can. Tell them what I'm allowed to tell them. Answer what questions I can. Peterson, Levi frowned. I think Nathan mentioned him once. They were in the same briefing room. They were friends. Daniel used to tease Nathan about his terrible jokes. Said he'd rather take a bullet than listen to another one. She smiled sadly at the memory. The day he died, Daniel was trying to reach Nathan's position, trying to provide medical support. He didn't make it, but he tried. They both died trying to help each other. Levi took a deep, shaky breath. Can I come with you? To see the Petersons? I'd like to. I don't know. I feel like I should be there. The woman studied him for a moment. That's up to the Petersons, but I can ask. They sat together in silence for a few minutes, the weight of shared grief creating a connection that hadn't existed an hour ago. Ghost had moved to sit beside Levi, pressing against his leg in that way dogs do when they sense someone needs comfort. He's warm, Levi said, running his hand over Ghost's head. I expected him to feel different, harder somehow. He's just a dog, she replied. A highly trained dog who's been through things most dogs never experience, but still just a dog. He likes bacon and hates baths and gets excited when he sees squirrels. She shrugged. The training makes him special, but at the end of the day, he just wants to be loved. Like all of us, Levi murmured. Like all of us. A knock came at the door. Ivy's voice, hesitant. Ma'am, you're, the colonel? He says there's a situation developing outside. More people have arrived. The woman exchanged a glance with Levi. We should go see what's happening. They emerged from the VIP room to find the Iron Horse transformed. In the 20 minutes they had been gone, the population of the bar had nearly doubled. Word had spread somehow, through text messages and phone calls, and the mysterious network that connected military communities faster than any official communication. People stood against the walls, sat in hastily arranged chairs, crowded around the bar. Some wore unit patches that Levi recognized. Others wore civilian clothes, but had the look of veterans who had seen combat. And at the center of it all, standing at attention in a loose formation, were Blake, Amber, Archer, and half a dozen other Rangers who had arrived in their absence. Colonel Crawford stepped forward as she entered. Senior Chief, he said formally, it seems your identity has become somewhat widely known. These soldiers have something they'd like to say. Blake stepped out of the formation first. His face was pale but determined, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the arrogance that had filled it earlier. Ma'am, Senior Chief Petty Officer Thornton. He swallowed hard. On behalf of myself and my squad, I offer our sincere and complete apologies for our behavior tonight. We acted dishonorably. We disrespected a senior enlisted member with a record of service that we can only aspire to match. We were wrong, and we accept full responsibility." He dropped to one knee. Behind him, Amber and Archer and the others did the same. "We request the opportunity to make amends in whatever way you see fit. Any disciplinary action, any punishment, we'll accept without complaint. We were supposed to be Rangers, and Rangers are supposed to recognize warriors. We failed that test tonight." The bar had gone completely silent. Even the new arrivals held their breath, watching to see what would happen. The woman looked at the kneeling soldiers for a long moment. Then she walked forward until she stood directly in front of Blake. She reached down and put her hand on his shoulder. "Stand up." He rose slowly, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Look at me." He raised his gaze. "That Ranger tab on your sleeve," she said quietly. "It's not a trophy. It's not a badge of superiority. It's a responsibility. It means you're supposed to be better than this. Not just physically, not just tactically, but morally, ethically, in every way that matters." Blake nodded, shame coloring his features. "You failed tonight. You acted like a bully instead of a leader. You used your rank and your size and your training to intimidate someone you assumed was weaker. That's not what Rangers do. That's not what any soldier should do." "Yes, ma'am." "But," she waited until he met her eyes again, "you also recognized your mistake. You apologized. You knelt in front of witnesses and admitted you were wrong. That takes courage, too. A different kind of courage, but real courage nonetheless." Blake's throat worked as he swallowed. "We're all human. We all make mistakes. The measure of a soldier isn't whether they fall down. It's whether they get back up and do better." She stepped back. "Consider this a lesson. One I hope you never forget." "I won't, ma'am. I swear I won't." She nodded once. "Then we're done here. All of you, get up. And the next time you see someone who doesn't look like what you expect, remember this night. Remember that service doesn't always come with a uniform, and valor doesn't always announce itself." The kneeling soldiers rose to their feet. The tension in the bar broke like a fever, conversations resuming in low, reverent tones. Ivy appeared at the woman's elbow. "Ma'am, can I get you anything? Food? A drink? On the house?" "Just water, thank you." The old Vietnam veteran, Caleb Morrison, had made his way through the crowd. He stopped in front of her and raised a trembling hand in a salute that had last been used in a jungle 50 years ago. "Ma'am," he said simply, "tonight, drinks are on me, for you and anyone you're with." "That's very kind, but no arguments." His roomy eyes held hers. "I know what it is to serve in silence, to do things that can never be acknowledged, to carry weights that nobody else can see. You let an old man buy you a drink, and you accept the gratitude of someone who understands, even if he can't say it out loud." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "One drink, thank you." The night had shifted into something unexpected. What had begun as a confrontation had become something like a gathering, a communion of people who served or had served or loved those who served. The woman found herself surrounded not by enemies but by allies, by people who wanted to shake her hand or offer their thanks or simply stand near her as if her presence conveyed some blessing. Ghost stayed at her side through all of it, a steady anchor in the swirl of humanity. Levi had joined the conversation. His earlier grief transformed into something more like peace. He spoke quietly with other soldiers about his brother, sharing stories he'd never been able to share before. At the bar, Captain Hartwell stood beside Colonel Crawford, both men watching the scene unfold. "Interesting night," Hartwell observed. "That's one word for it. What happens now? To the personnel involved, I mean. This is going to have repercussions." Crawford shrugged. "That depends on her. If she wants to file complaints, there's enough here to end careers. But somehow, I don't think that's her style." "Why not? She'd be within her rights." The colonel took a sip of his whiskey. "Because people like her don't seek punishment. They seek understanding. They want the lesson to matter more than the consequences." He set down his glass. "I've known a few operators in my time, not many, and never well, but enough to recognize the type. They're not interested in destroying people. They're interested in building them up, even the ones who attack them. That's remarkably generous. It's remarkably rare, which is why people like her end up doing the jobs they do, not because they're the most violent, or the most skilled, or the most dedicated, because they're the most human. They remember what they're fighting for, even when the fighting gets ugly. The night wore on. Conversations rose and fell like tides. Stories were exchanged, bonds were formed. Walls that had existed between strangers began to crumble under the weight of shared purpose. And through it all, the woman who called herself Whisper stood at the center of it all, accepting gratitude she hadn't sought, offering forgiveness that hadn't been asked for, demonstrating the kind of quiet leadership that no training could teach. At 11:30, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and something flickered across her face. A tightening around the eyes, a slight intake of breath. Whatever the message contained, it wasn't what she'd expected. "Everything okay?" Ivy asked, noticing the change. "Fine," she replied, but her voice had tightened. "I need to make a call. Is there somewhere quiet?" "The VIP room is still available. Thank you." She slipped away from the crowd, Ghost following at her heels. The beaded curtain clicked behind her, cutting off the noise and light of the bar. Alone in the dim room, she dialed the number that had appeared on her screen. A number she hadn't seen in 5 years. A number attached to someone who was supposed to be dead. The line connected. Whisper. A voice she knew intimately, one that had haunted her dreams and her waking hours ever since March 15th, 2019. Long time. Her knees nearly buckled. "Nathan?" A pause, then a low laugh, familiar despite the years. "Surprised? You're dead. I watched you die." The reports confirmed it. Reports can say a lot of things, especially classified reports. The same words she'd used earlier, thrown back at her with gentle irony. Turns out the rumors of my death were strategically useful. 5 years, her voice cracked. 5 years I've carried this. 5 years I've visited families. 5 years I've told Levi stories about his dead brother. I know, I'm sorry. I couldn't reach out. Not until now. The operation required complete silence, complete commitment. But the operation is over now, and there's something you need to know. Ghost had pressed against her legs, sensing her distress. She reached down and gripped his fur, anchoring herself. "What?" "Ghost's litter mate. Remember Phantom? The other pup from that litter we trained together? Of course I remember. She's still in Syria, Sector 7. The network we built, it's still running, but it's compromised. They need an extraction, and they need it now. 47 assets, Whisper, just like before, and this time they need both of us." She closed her eyes. The weight of 5 years pressed down on her shoulders, the grief she'd carried, the guilt she'd shouldered, the missions she'd run trying to honor a dead man's memory, and now that dead man was on the phone, asking her to do it all again. "Whisper?" Nathan's voice softened. "Are you there?" "I'm here. I know this is a lot. I know I have no right to ask. But Phantom is out there alone, holding position just like Ghost did. And the 47 are counting on us. Both of us, together this time." She opened her eyes and looked down at Ghost. The dog looked back at her with those dark, ancient eyes that had seen bunkers and battlefields and horrors she couldn't describe to civilians. "When?" "Soon. I can't give details over this line, but soon. Can you be ready?" "I'm always ready." "I know." There was a smile in his voice now, the same smile that had cracked jokes in the middle of firefights and told her everything would be okay even when nothing was. "That's why I called you first. That's why it has to be you. The Petersons," she said suddenly. "I was supposed to visit them tonight. Daniel's family. I know. I'm sorry about the timing, but this can't wait. They've waited 5 years. They can wait one more day. Thank you, Whisper." "Thank you for understanding." She gripped at the phone tighter. "Nathan?" "Yeah?" "Don't you dare die on me again. I couldn't handle it twice." Another laugh, warm and familiar. "I'll do my best. Ghost Unit 7, back in action. Just like old times." "Just like old times?" The line went dead. She stood in the darkness of the VIP room, phone still pressed to her ear, trying to process what had just happened. Nathan was alive. The mission wasn't over. And somewhere in Syria, a dog named Phantom was holding position, waiting for someone to come back for her, just like Ghost had waited, just like she had promised she always would. Ghost nuzzled her hand, and she knelt down to press her forehead against his. "One more time, boy. One more mission. You ready?" The dog's tail wagged once. His eyes never wavered. She stood, squared her shoulders, and walked back into the light. The bar had grown quieter now, the initial surge of emotion settling into something calmer. People sat in small groups, talking softly, sharing drinks and memories. Levi was still there, deep in conversation with Colonel Crawford, learning things about his brother that no official report would ever contain. The woman walked to the center of the room, and somehow, without her saying anything, everyone turned to face her. The conversations died. The glasses stopped clinking. The whole bar held its breath. "I want to thank you all," she said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner, "for your understanding, for your forgiveness, and for reminding me why we do what we do." Blake straightened where he stood. "Ma'am, is there anything we can do? Anything at all?" She looked at him, at the tab on his sleeve, at the shame and determination that warred in his expression. "Yes, there is. When you go back to base tomorrow, I want you to remember this night, not as an embarrassment, but as a lesson. And I want you to pass that lesson on. Teach your squad, teach your unit, teach everyone who will listen that service doesn't always look like what we expect, and warriors don't always announce themselves." "Yes, ma'am. And one more thing," she turned to Levi. "Your brother was the best K9 handler I ever worked with. He loved that dog more than anything, and the dog loved him back. That's what got us through Syria. Not training, not equipment, love." Levi nodded, tears glistening in his eyes again. "Stay in touch," she continued. "All of you. Because this world needs more people who understand what really matters. Not rank, not glory, not recognition. Just doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, even when it costs everything." She reached down and touched Ghost's head. "Especially when it costs everything." Colonel Crawford raised his glass. "To those who serve in silence." "To those who serve in silence," the bar echoed back. She nodded once, accepting the toast, accepting the respect, accepting the weight that came with being the kind of person she was. Then she turned and walked toward the back door, Ghost at her side, ready to disappear into the night and answer the call that only she could answer. At the door, she paused and looked back one final time. "Remember," she said softly, her words carrying across the silent room, "the loudest warriors are rarely the greatest, and the greatest warriors are often the ones you never see at all." The door opened, the night swallowed her whole, and in the bar called the Iron Horse, 25 soldiers and veterans and civilians sat in silence, contemplating the woman who had just changed all their lives and wondering if they would ever see her again. The back door of the Iron Horse opened onto a gravel parking lot lit by a single flickering sodium lamp. The night air hit her face like a splash of cold water, carrying the scent of pine trees and distant rain. Ghost padded beside her, his claws clicking softly against the stones as they walked toward the shadows at the edge of the lot. She didn't make it far. "Wait!" Levi's voice cut through the darkness behind her. She heard his footsteps crunching on gravel, hurried but hesitant, like a man chasing something he wasn't sure he wanted to catch. She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Please," he said, closer now. "Just give me a minute." She turned slowly. Levi stood 10 feet away, silhouetted against the light spilling from the bar's windows. His shoulders were hunched, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his face a map of emotions too complex to read in the dim light. "You're leaving?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I have to. The phone call. Something happened." She studied him for a long moment. This young man who had attacked her with grief-fueled rage just hours ago, who had accused her of dishonoring his brother's memory, who had stood at the center of a confrontation that could have ended very differently. "Something happened," she confirmed. Is it about Nathan? About what really happened in Syria?" She said nothing. Levi stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I saw your face when you came back from that room. Something changed. You looked like you'd seen a ghost." The irony of his word choice wasn't lost on her. She glanced down at Ghost, who sat motionless at her side, watching Levi with those ancient knowing eyes. "I can't tell you," she said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I need you to trust me when I say that your brother's sacrifice meant something. It still means something, and the story isn't over yet." "What does that mean?" "It means..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It means that sometimes the people we think we've lost aren't as lost as we believed, and sometimes the missions we think are finished are just beginning." Levi's breath caught. "Are you saying..." "I'm not saying anything." She cut him off gently but firmly. "I'm asking you to wait, to be patient, and to be ready, because when the time comes, you might have a role to play in all of this." "A role? What kind of role?" "The kind your brother would have wanted you to play." She reached out and gripped his shoulder, the same gesture of connection she'd offered in the VIP room. You came here tonight full of anger and pain. You left understanding something you didn't understand before. That's growth, Levi. That's exactly what Nathan would have wanted for you. Tears glistened in his eyes again, but he didn't look away. I spent 5 years hating the world for taking him. 5 years being angry at everyone and everything. And tonight I find out that the whole story was different from what I believed. The whole story is always different from what we believe. That's the nature of truth. It reveals itself in pieces when we're ready to receive it. And you think I'm ready now? She studied his face, seeing echoes of Nathan in the set of his jaw. The determination in his eyes, the stubborn strength that ran through the Barnes family like a river through bedrock. I think you're getting there. The back door of the bar opened again, spilling light and sound into the parking lot. Colonel Crawford emerged, his leather jacket pulled tight against the night chill, his white hair catching the glow from the sodium lamp. "Senior Chief," he called out, "a word before you disappear." She nodded to Levi. "Go back inside, stay warm, and remember what I told you." Levi hesitated, then nodded slowly. He walked past Crawford with a respectful nod, disappearing through the door and leaving the two veterans alone in the darkness. Crawford approached with the measured pace of a man who had learned long ago that rushing rarely accomplished anything worth accomplishing. He stopped a few feet away, his hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that spoke of decades of military bearing. "You're going back," he said. Not a question. "How did you know?" "Because I know that look. I've seen it before, on the faces of operators heading into missions they might not come back from. The look of someone who has made peace with what they have to do." She didn't deny it. Crawford reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, metallic, worn smooth by years of handling. He held it out to her, and even in the dim light, she recognized it immediately. A challenge coin. Bronze, heavy, engraved with symbols that most people would never understand. On one side, the words Silent Thunder curved around the edge. On the other, a date, March 15th, 2019. "I've carried this for 5 years, Crawford said quietly. "They gave it to me after the briefing, after they showed us what you and your team accomplished. They said it was a reminder that some victories can never be celebrated publicly, but they should never be forgotten privately." She took the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. "Sir, I can't accept this." "You can, and you will." His voice brooked no argument. "I've been waiting to give that to the right person for half a decade. Tonight, I found her." She closed her fingers around the coin, feeling its edges press into her skin. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just come back alive." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Whatever you're walking into, whatever mission is pulling you away from here tonight, remember that there are people who know what you've done. People who will remember, even if the world never learns your name. That's not why I do it. I know. That's exactly why you deserve to be remembered." They stood in silence for a moment. Two soldiers from different generations, different wars, different worlds, connected by the invisible threads of service and sacrifice that bound all warriors together. Then Crawford stepped back and raised his hand in a salute. "Good hunting, Senior Chief." She returned the salute with crisp precision. "Thank you, Colonel, for everything." He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the bar, leaving her alone with Ghost in the darkness. She looked down at her partner, at the dog who had stayed by her side through firefights and flashbacks, through nightmares and new beginnings. Ghost looked back at her with those dark, steady eyes that had seen the worst humanity had to offer and still believed in the best. "One more time," she whispered. "One more mission, and then maybe we can finally rest." Ghost's tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement that needed no words. They walked together toward the edge of the parking lot, toward the shadows that waited to swallow them whole. Behind them, the sounds of the Iron Horse faded into the distance, replaced by the whisper of wind through pine trees and the distant rumble of thunder over Fort Bragg. She had almost reached her truck when another set of footsteps caught her attention. Lighter than Levi's, more purposeful than Crawford's. She turned to find Ivy Blackwood standing at the edge of the light, her waitress apron still tied around her waist, her eyes wide with something that looked like determination, mixed with fear. "Ma'am," Ivy said, her voice trembling slightly, "I know you're leaving. I know I probably shouldn't bother you, but I had to say something before you go." "Go ahead." Ivy twisted her hands together, gathering courage. "My father was a Marine, Fallujah, 2004. He came home different. Broken, my mom used to say. He never talked about what happened over there, never let anyone in. And then one day, when I was 12, he just left, walked out the door and never came back. She paused, swallowing hard. For years, I hated him for that. Hated the military, hated everything connected to it. I took this job because it was the only place that would hire me with my schedule, not because I wanted to be around soldiers. A tear slipped down her cheek. But tonight, watching you, watching how you handled everything, I think I finally understand something I never understood before. What's that? That the weight my father carried wasn't his fault. That what he went through changed him in ways I couldn't see. And that maybe, wherever he is now, he's still fighting battles I can't imagine. Ivy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I just wanted to say thank you for showing me that, for helping me forgive someone I thought I could never forgive. The woman stepped forward and took Ivy's hands in hers. Your father's war didn't end when he came home. It followed him, haunted him, broke him in ways that no one who hasn't been there can understand. But that doesn't mean he stopped loving you. It means he loved you so much that he couldn't bear to let you see what he'd become. How do you know that? Because I've been there, because I've felt that weight. And because every warrior I've ever known who walked away from their family did it not out of weakness, but out of a twisted kind of love. They thought they were protecting the people they cared about by removing themselves from the equation. Ivy's tears fell freely now. Do you think he's still out there somewhere? I don't know, but I know that if he is, he thinks about you every day. And I know that if you ever get the chance to see him again, you should take it. Not to demand explanations, not to assign blame, just to let him know that you understand, that you forgive him, that you love him despite everything. Ivy nodded, unable to speak. The woman released her hands and stepped back. Take care of yourself, Ivy Blackwood, and take care of the soldiers who come through that bar. They need people like you more than they know. I will. Ivy's voice was barely a whisper. I promise I will. She watched the young waitress walk back toward the bar, her steps steadier than before, her shoulders straighter, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally begun to lift. Then she turned to her truck, a battered Ford pickup that had seen better decades, and opened the passenger door for Ghost. The dog jumped in with practiced ease, settling into the seat that had molded to his body over countless miles and missions. She walked around to the driver's side and paused with her hand on the door handle. The night stretched out before her, full of shadows and possibilities, full of missions yet to come and battles yet to be fought. Nathan was alive. The words still felt impossible, even though she'd heard his voice, recognized his laugh, felt the truth of him resonating through the phone line like a frequency only she could detect. 5 years of grief, 5 years of guilt, 5 years of carrying the weight of his supposed death on her shoulders. And now she learned it had all been a cover story. She should be angry. Part of her was angry, a hot ember burning in her chest that demanded answers, explanations, justifications for the pain she'd endured. But larger than the anger was something else, something that felt remarkably like hope. Nathan was alive, and somewhere in Syria, a dog named Phantom was waiting. She climbed into the truck and started the engine. The old Ford coughed twice before settling into its familiar rumble, a sound that had become as comforting as a heartbeat over the years. Ghost pressed his nose against the window, watching the bar recede in the side mirror as she pulled out of the parking lot. The Iron Horse grew smaller and smaller until it was just a smudge of light against the darkness, then nothing at all. The road unwound before her like a ribbon of possibility. She drove in silence for 20 minutes, her thoughts churning through everything that had happened, everything that was about to happen, everything that had led her to this moment. Her phone buzzed again. A text message this time, from a number she didn't recognize. Extraction point confirmed, 2300 hours tomorrow, coordinates to follow. Ghost Unit 7 reassembling. She read the message 3 times, committing every word to memory, then deleted it. Old habits died hard, especially habits that had kept her alive through situations that should have killed her a dozen times over. Ghost Unit 7. The name echoed through her mind like a prayer, like a promise, like a homecoming she hadn't known she needed. They had been the best. 7 operators and their K-9 partners, handpicked for missions too sensitive for regular channels, too dangerous for conventional forces. They had worked in shadows, fought in silence, died in classified reports that would never see the light of day. Or so she had believed. If Nathan was alive, who else might have survived? Who else might be waiting in the wings, ready to answer the call when the mission demanded it? The questions multiplied faster than she could process them, each one spawning a dozen more. But underlying all of them was a single, unshakable truth. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't carrying this weight by herself. The thought should have brought comfort. Instead, it brought fear. Because having people to lose meant having something that could be taken away. And she had learned long ago that the universe had a cruel way of taking away everything she dared to love. She drove for another hour, following roads that grew progressively smaller and more isolated, until she reached a safe house that officially didn't exist. A cabin in the woods, stocked with supplies and equipment, maintained by people whose names she would never know. Ghost jumped out of the truck and immediately began a perimeter sweep, his nose working overtime as he cataloged scents and assessed threats. She watched him work, marveling as always at the precision of his training, the dedication of his focus, the absolute commitment to the task at hand. Inside the cabin, she found everything she needed: communications equipment, weapons, medical supplies, maps of regions that most Americans couldn't locate on a globe. Everything required for a mission that would never be acknowledged and could never be discussed. She sat down at the small desk in the corner and began to plan. Tomorrow night, she would be extracted. The day after, she would be in transit to a location she couldn't yet know, and sometime after that, she would be back in the field, doing the work that had defined her entire adult life. But first, there was something she needed to do. She picked up a secure phone and dialed a number she had memorized years ago, a number that connected to a house 10 miles from Fort Bragg, where a family waited for news about a son who had died serving his country. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, thick with the weariness of someone who had learned to expect bad news. "Hello? Mrs. Peterson, this is a friend of Daniel's. I was hoping I could come see you tomorrow morning. There are some things I'd like to share with you about your son." A long pause. Then, softly, "We've been waiting for 5 years for someone to tell us the truth about what happened to our boy. Are you that someone?" "I'm going to try to be, ma'am. I'm going to try." She arranged the visit for 9 the next morning, then ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the wall. The Peterson family deserved answers. So did the Barnes family. So did all the families of all the warriors who had fallen in operations that would never be declassified, in battles that would never make the history books, in sacrifices that would never receive the recognition they deserved. She couldn't give them everything. Classification levels and national security and operational necessity would always limit what she could share, but she could give them something. She could give them the knowledge that their loved ones had mattered, had made a difference, had died for something worth dying for. That was the least she could do, the very least. Ghost finished his perimeter sweep and padded back into the cabin, settling at her feet with a contented sigh. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, feeling the familiar texture of his fur beneath her fingers. "Tomorrow's gonna be a big day, boy. You ready?" The dog's tail thumped once against the wooden floor. "Yeah," she said softly. "Me too." She spent the night preparing, checking equipment, reviewing protocols, running through scenarios in her mind, planning for contingencies, preparing for the 1,000 things that could go wrong in any operation. At 0600 hours, she rose from a sleep that had been more meditation than rest and began her morning routine. Exercise, breakfast, equipment checks, the rituals that had kept her grounded through years of chaos as an uncertainty. At 0830, she loaded Ghost into the truck and drove to the Peterson house. The home was modest, a single-story ranch with a carefully maintained lawn and a flag flying at half-staff. She parked on the street and sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts, preparing for a conversation that would require all of her emotional reserves. Ghost whined softly, sensing her tension. "Stay here, boy. I'll be back soon." She walked up the front path and knocked on the door. Footsteps approached from inside, and then the door swung open to reveal a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and careworn, but with eyes that still held a spark of strength. "Mrs. Peterson? You must be the woman who called last night. Please come in." The house was filled with photographs. Daniel at graduation, Daniel in uniform, Daniel with his squad, his arm around a buddy whose face she recognized from 1,000 shared missions. Mr. Peterson rose from a chair in the living room, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Thank you for coming. We've had visitors before, military types who spoke in generalities and left us with more questions than answers. We're hoping you can do better. I'll do my best, sir. She sat with them for 2 hours, sharing what she could, withholding what she must, painting a picture of their son's final days that was truthful without being complete. She told them about his courage, his humor, his dedication to his teammates. She told them about the mission without telling them the mission's purpose. She told them about his final moments without telling them the classified context that had led to those moments. And when she finished, when Mrs. Peterson was crying and Mr. Peterson was gripping her hand like a lifeline, she told them one more thing. Your son didn't die in vain. The work he did, the sacrifice he made, it saved lives. Many lives. People are walking around today, going to work, raising families, living normal lives because of what Daniel did. They don't know his name. They don't know he existed. But they're alive because he chose to put himself between them and the darkness. That's... Mrs. Peterson wiped her eyes. That's all we ever wanted to know, that it meant something, that he meant something. He meant everything, ma'am, to me, to his teammates, to the 47 people who are still breathing because of him. She stayed a while longer, answering questions where she could, deflecting where she couldn't, offering comfort in the only way she knew how. And when she finally rose to leave, both Petersons embraced her with a fierceness that spoke of 5 years of unanswered questions finally finding resolution. Will we ever know the whole truth? Mr. Peterson asked at the door. Someday, maybe, when the world is ready, when the people he protected are no longer in danger. She paused. But know this, I will never forget your son, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of his sacrifice. She walked back to her truck where Ghost waited, his tail wagging as she approached. She climbed in, started the engine, and drove away from the Peterson house with tears streaming down her face for the first time in years. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. She made one more stop, at a cemetery on the outskirts of town, where a headstone marked the supposed final resting place of Sergeant Nathan Barnes. She stood before the grave for a long time, Ghost at her side, staring at a name that she now knew was carved on a stone marking an empty plot. You magnificent liar, she whispered. 5 years I came here. 5 years I talked to a stone, and the whole time you were out there somewhere, doing the same work we always did. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, carrying the scent of flowers and fresh-cut grass. I'm coming for you, Nathan. I'm coming for Phantom. And when this mission is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about communication and closure, and not letting your friends think you're dead for half a decade. She placed her hand on the headstone, feeling the cool granite beneath her palm. Ghost Unit 7, back in action, just like you said, just like old times. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the empty grave behind, heading toward a future that had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more hopeful. At 2200 hours, she stood at the extraction point, a clearing in the woods 15 miles from any road. Ghost sat at her side, alert and ready, his ears swiveling to catch sounds that human hearing couldn't detect. The helicopter came in low and fast, running without lights, its rotors barely audible until it was almost on top of them. It touched down in the clearing, and a door slid open to reveal a figure silhouetted against the dim interior lighting. A figure she recognized immediately. Nathan Barnes stepped out of the helicopter, older than she remembered, with new scars on his face and new weight in his eyes, but unmistakably alive. He walked toward her, with the same easy confidence she remembered from 1,000 shared missions, the same crooked smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Whisper, he said. You look good. You look dead, she replied, or at least you're supposed to. He laughed, the same warm laugh she remembered from Syria, from training sessions, from long nights of planning operations that would never be acknowledged. Yeah, well, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Turns out being dead is a great cover for the kind of work I've been doing, which is deep cover. So deep that even the people who sent me didn't know where I was most of the time. But that's over now. The mission's changed, and I need my partner back. He looked down at Ghost, who had risen to his feet at Nathan's approach, tail wagging with a recognition that transcended the 5 years of separation. Hey, boy, Nathan said softly, kneeling to let Ghost sniff his hand. Remember me? Ghost's answer was to press his head against Nathan's chest, a gesture of affection that the dog rarely showed to anyone. I think that's a yes, she observed. Nathan stood, his hand still resting on Ghost's head. We've got a lot to catch up on, a lot I need to explain, but first, we've got a job to do. Phantom's waiting, and she's been holding position for too long already. How long? 3 days. Same situation as Ghost, back in Raqqa. Critical intel, compromised location, K9 asset refusing to abandon the objective. His jaw tightened. She's running out of time. She looked at the helicopter, at the shadows inside where other figures waited, at the darkness that promised danger and purpose and everything she had been missing for 5 years. Ghost Unit 7, she said quietly. Who else made it? More than you'd think. Less than I'd hoped, but enough. Enough to do what needs to be done. She nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the challenge coin in her pocket, the weight of 5 years of grief transforming into something else entirely. Then let's go get our dog. She climbed into the helicopter, Ghost jumping in beside her. Nathan followed, sliding the door closed behind them. The aircraft lifted off, banking hard toward the east, toward Syria, toward a mission that would never be acknowledged and could never be discussed. But as the helicopter climbed into the night sky, as the lights of Fort Bragg faded into the distance below, she allowed herself a moment of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Because Nathan was alive, because Ghost Unit 7 was reassembling, because somewhere in the darkness, a dog named Phantom was waiting for someone to come back for her. And Hazel Whisper Thornton had never left a partner behind, not once, not ever. The helicopter disappeared into the clouds, carrying its passengers toward a future that only they could see. And in the bar called the Iron Horse, in the homes of the Peterson and Barnes families, in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed what happened that night, a story was already beginning to spread. A story about a woman who walked in silence, a dog who guarded in darkness, and a love that transcended death, classification, and every barrier that the world could throw in its path. Some stories are never meant to be told, but the greatest stories are never meant to end. Tonight, you witnessed something powerful. A woman walked into a bar with nothing but a dog and a glass of water. She endured mockery, accusations, and disrespect from people who thought they knew everything about service and sacrifice. And in the end, she taught them all a lesson they will carry for the rest of their lives. The truth is simple but profound. The loudest voices rarely belong to the greatest warriors. Real strength does not announce itself, real courage does not seek applause, and real heroes often walk among us wearing flannel shirts and carrying wounds we cannot see. Hazel Thornton never asked for recognition. Ghosts never needed medals. They served in silence because that is what true service looks like. Not for glory, not for praise, but because someone had to stand in the darkness so others could live in the light. So the next time you meet someone who seems ordinary, remember this story. Remember that the quiet woman in the corner might have saved 47 lives. Remember that the scarred veteran at the end of the bar might have held a position for 14 hours alone. Remember that every person you encounter carries a story you know nothing about. If this story moved you, do 3 things right now. First, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story like this. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And third, the next time you see a veteran, a first responder, or anyone who serves in silence, simply say thank you. 2 words. That is all it takes to honor a lifetime of sacrifice.